For a long time, the galaxy had been a place of quiet tension, where different species met, but never truly trusted each other. Then came the humans from a distant, blue and green world called Earth, which most species only knew by one label, a death world. Earth was not just dangerous, it was terrifying. Storms could flatten entire cities. Predators hunted with clever instincts. The planet itself shook and burned without warning. And yet the humans had not only survived, they had built civilizations, launched themselves into space, and eventually reached the stars. When they arrived at the galactic Concord, many watched with uneasy interest. A Category 5 Deathworlder species was no small matter. Most species wouldn't survive an hour on Earth's surface. But instead of being aggressive or demanding, the humans were kind. They offered help freely, shared their technologies, and listened carefully at meetings. They didn't bark orders or boast about their strength. In fact, they were the ones stopping fights, brokering peace deals, and protecting smaller civilizations who had nothing to offer in return. Their ships came not with weapons drawn, but with food, medicine, engineers, and warm greetings. At first, other species assumed this was a clever trick, a hidden plan to gain power by pretending to be peaceful. But months turned to years, and the pattern remained the same. The humans were always there during a crisis, offering aid, defending the helpless, and walking away without asking for anything. Slowly, trust began to build. Some admired them. Others, quietly, began to feel uneasy. How could a species born on such a hostile world act so gently? The more you looked at Earth's environment, the stranger the humans seemed. Their bodies were built to endure pain. Their minds were flexible and stubborn, and their history was filled with challenges that would have broken other species. Yet they smiled easily, made jokes in tense moments, and made friends across cultural and planetary lines like it was second nature. Many in the galactic Concord began to call them the Kind Ones, a name that spread quickly through the stars. Children in peaceful worlds grew up hearing bedtime stories of brave humans who crossed space just to help a struggling village or repair a broken satellite. But in shadowed corners of the galaxy, some began whispering a different question one. That made even seasoned military commanders pause. What if the humans weren't soft? What if they were just holding back? What if this kindness wasn't all they had, but a choice, a careful decision to be better, even when they didn't have? To be? The idea was unsettling. Other species had shown their strength early, using force or intimidation. Humans did the opposite. They were patient, they followed the rules, and they worked within the Concord system. But beneath that calm surface, there were quiet signals that only the observant noticed. Their ships, even the ones marked for peacekeeping, were built to handle far more than was needed. Their soldiers, rarely seen in public, moved with quiet discipline. Their scientists had ideas decades ahead of the Concord standard. And most telling of all, in the few recorded moments where human lives were truly threatened, they moved with terrifying speed and precision, ending conflicts in seconds. These moments were rare, hidden behind official reports, but the stories still reached curious ears. It was clear that the humans knew how to fight, they just chose not to. As time passed, some species grew too comfortable. They began to speak about humans as soft-hearted idealists, pretending that the warning signs weren't there. A few began to take advantage of human kindness, pushing limits in small ways, assuming there would be no consequences. But in the quiet halls of intelligence agencies, military briefings, and research stations, there were those who watched the humans closely, and their reports always ended the same way. The Deathworlders are peaceful, but only because they want to be. The most unsettling thing wasn't what humanity had done. It was what they hadn't done. They had every reason to take power, but didn't. They had strength, but chose restraint. The galaxy didn't know whether to feel thankful or afraid, because if there ever came a day when humanity's patience ran out, if they were pushed too far, if someone gave them no choice but to act, no one knew what would happen. But one thing was becoming clear. The question was no longer if they would be tested, but when. And in that quiet gap between peace and provocation, the galaxy held its breath. The Drethry Imperium was known across the galaxy as a proud and relentless species, bred from birth to conquer and expand their territory by any means necessary. Their strong, armored bodies and sharp minds made them natural warriors, and their culture prized strength above all else. When the Galactic Concord formed as a loose alliance of peaceful species, the Drethry saw it as a weakness, a web of rules that only slowed progress. They eyed the new human members of the Concord with thinly veiled disdain, convinced that the so-called kind ones from Earth were little more than soft creatures who lacked the will to dominate or defend themselves properly. The Drethry, leadership, hungry for power and control, set their sights on expanding into Concord space, particularly targeting the outer colonies of 3 small species under human protection. These colonies were scattered on the edge of explored space, lightly defended but vital to the trade and culture of their peoples. The humans had long been their guardians, sending peacekeepers, supplies, and diplomatic support to help them thrive. To the Drethry, this was an opportunity to test the true nature of the humans, to see if their compassion was real or just a mask hiding weakness. Ignoring warnings from other Concord members about the dangers of provoking humans, the Drethry Imperial Council authorized a calculated strike, one meant to be quick, devastating, and a clear message that the Imperium would not be stopped. The attack was planned with cold precision, targeting a civilian convoy traveling between the outer colonies. The convoy carried not only goods and workers, but also a transport ship filled with children from several species, including human children, innocent and unaware of the looming danger. As the convoy moved through a narrow star system corridor, Drethry warships appeared without warning, their weapons charged and ready. The assault was brutal, but strategic, designed to minimize the chance of escape and ensure maximum disruption. The convoy's defenses, light and unprepared for such aggression, fell quickly. The civilian ships were disabled, some destroyed, and the attackers left without offering any chance for surrender or negotiation. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as news of the ambush spread. The human delegation at the Galactic Concord immediately called for justice. They demanded that the Drethry be sanctioned, that peace talks be held to prevent further attacks on innocent lives. But the Military Council and many member species, wary of open conflict, hesitated. The Drethry ambassador, a towering figure, with cold eyes and a mocking smile, took the floor during a public session and ridiculed the humans' pleas. His words echoed through the grand chamber. Perhaps Deathworlders forgot how to bite. It was a challenge wrapped in contempt, meant to belittle the humans and test their limits. The room fell silent as the humans stood and left without a word, their faces unreadable, but their eyes burning with a quiet fire. That night, across the galaxy, diplomats, soldiers, and civilians alike remembered the expression on the faces of the human delegation, the calm, controlled determination that seemed to promise that this insult would not be forgotten. Whispers spread among many species. The kindness of humans was a choice, but their strength was real and waiting. Some feared the consequences of the Drethry's mistake, while others doubted that the humans would ever reveal their full power. But the question hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. What happens when the kind ones stop playing nice? The attack was not just a mistake of war. It was a miscalculation of character, one that would change the course of galactic history forever. After the attack and the sharp insult from the Drethry ambassador, something changed in the way humanity moved through the galaxy. The humans who had once been so present in every corner of the galactic concord suddenly began to withdraw. First, their ambassadors quietly left the great halls of diplomacy, their chairs empty, but their silence louder than words. The peacekeepers, who had worked tirelessly to protect weaker colonies, vanished from patrol routes, leaving gaps where they once stood as guardians. The Concord interpreted this withdrawal as a sign of sulking, believing that the humans were upset, but would soon return, their good nature unable to stay away from the problems of the galaxy for long. Even the Drethery, confident in their perceived victory, relaxed, convinced the humans had been cowed. But beneath the calm surface of galactic politics, something far more deliberate was unfolding. Across hundreds of star systems, human ships simply disappeared. Trade routes that once hummed with the movement of cargo vessels and diplomats went quiet, leading many to wonder where the humans had gone. Military patrols that had long guarded remote regions stopped responding to calls. Listening posts that monitored space for any kind of unusual signal began to pick up strange transmissions codes and bursts of data that no other species could understand or decode. These signals spread through the network like a whisper, growing in intensity and complexity, but always staying just beyond reach, a puzzle with no key. Days passed, then weeks, and then even these mysterious signals stopped. An unnatural silence settled over a vast area of space. It was as if a great shadow had been cast across the stars themselves, and no one knew why. Then, without any warning or explanation, the first act of the humans' response became clear. A Drethery border moon, a key strategic outpost on the edge of their territory, suddenly vanished. It was not destroyed in a chaotic explosion, nor did it fall to a long siege. Instead, it disappeared as if a precise and powerful force had burned it away in an instant, leaving nothing but a clean scar on the night sky where the moon had been. No message came with this act, no declaration of war or demand for surrender. The silence that had come before was broken by this single sharp reminder. The humans were no longer ignoring the Drethery's aggression. Across the galaxy, this event sent ripples of shock and uncertainty. The Drethery scrambled to understand what had happened to their outpost, sending ships to investigate, but found no survivors and no signs of traditional battle. Other species watched nervously, realizing that the humans' patience had limits, and those limits were now being tested. The Galactic Concord called emergency meetings, but even the most experienced diplomats struggled to predict what the humans would do next. The balance of power in the galaxy shifted overnight, and everyone knew this was only the beginning of something far greater than a simple dispute over colonies. As the days stretched on, the silence grew heavier. Human fleets remained hidden, their movements unpredictable and unseen. Other species whispered in fear and awe about what might come next, wondering if the kind ones from the blue world had finally decided to stop playing the role everyone expected of them. The question hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. What would happen when the humans finally showed their true strength? The answer was no longer a mystery. It was a warning. The galaxy was about to learn that the Deathworlders' kindness had been a shield, not a weakness. And the silence that fell before the storm was the calm before the most powerful force the galaxy had ever seen was unleashed. In the weeks that followed the sudden destruction of the Drethery border moon, the galaxy watched with growing dread. As a wave of destruction swept through the Drethery Imperium's fleets, silent and devastating. Within just 3 weeks, 12 entire war fleets each, carrying thousands of soldiers and hundreds of warships, were destroyed with shocking efficiency. Most of these fleets were disabled without firing a single shot in retaliation, disappearing, as if snuffed out by an unseen hand. The humans, once known for their kindness and diplomacy, now demonstrated tactics so unpredictable and deadly that they unsettled even the most battle-hardened commanders of the Drethery. The strategy was a blend of cold calculation and brutal precision, combining cutting-edge artificial intelligence systems that could disable enemy ships mid-flight and orbital strikes that struck with surgical accuracy, destroying key systems without causing widespread chaos. The human forces themselves had transformed into near-mythical figures, soldiers who appeared out of nowhere, moving like shadows in the void. Their armor bore no insignias, their faces remained unseen, and their actions were swift and untraceable. Stories spread quickly among captured Drethery, soldiers and commanders, about these ghostly warriors who fought without mercy but without unnecessary cruelty, striking only at their targets and then vanishing before any counterattack could be launched. One captured Drethery commander, his body weak from interrogation, but his mind sharp, whispered to those questioning him a truth that sent chills through the Concord's military leaders. They fight like they've been holding back for centuries. This phrase echoed in halls of power and military command centers alike, revealing a terrifying realization. The humans had long restrained their full strength, choosing peace and diplomacy over war, not because they lacked power, but because they chose restraint. Panic rippled through the galactic Concord. Emergency councils were convened, with representatives from dozens of species debating how to respond to this sudden shift in power. The pleas for peace and negotiation, once so warmly received from the human delegates, now went unanswered. The humans held their silence, letting their actions speak instead. Then, as if to make the message unmistakable, humanity sent a signal, broadcast across every communication channel and listening post in the galaxy. The message was clear, simple, and powerful. We came in peace. You mistook our mercy for weakness. This is your reminder. Earth is not peaceful. Humanity is simply patient. The words struck a nerve throughout the Concord and beyond. It was a warning wrapped in calm certainty, a statement that the humans' kindness had been a choice, not a flaw. The destruction of the Drethery fleets was a lesson in Fire One meant not to conquer or enslave, but to remind the galaxy that the Deathworlders were not to be underestimated or provoked. As the echoes of this new era spread, the other species looked on with a mixture of fear, respect, and awe. The humans had rewritten the rules of engagement, proving that true strength did not always roar loudly, but sometimes whispered quietly until the moment it became unstoppable. The lesson was clear. The era of taking humanity lightly was over, and every species would remember that the Blue World's people had patience, power, and an unyielding will to protect what they cared for. And those who had forgotten this truth were now paying the price in fire and silence. In the months that followed the devastating campaign against the Drethery Imperium, the galaxy witnessed something unexpected, an end to war that came not through conquest, but through mercy and justice. The mighty Drethery war machine, once feared for its unstoppable advance, collapsed under the weight of human strategy and resolve. But when the humans took control of the territories and worlds once ruled by the Drethery, they did not impose their own rule or greedily claim power for themselves. Instead, they dismantled the war infrastructure with careful hands, destroying weapons factories, disabling warships, and tearing down military bases that had spread fear for generations. More importantly, they freed countless worlds that had lived under Drethery oppression planets where people had suffered under harsh rulers and relentless soldiers. The humans returned control to the native populations, helping rebuild governments and societies torn apart by war. Their actions were deliberate, guided by a belief that peace could only last if freedom and justice were given back to the people, not taken away by conquerors. Once their mission was complete, the humans quietly withdrew, fading from the spotlight as they returned to their own colonies scattered across the stars. They focused on healing the wounds of the past, rebuilding cities, restoring natural environments, and strengthening the bonds within their own worlds. The galaxy was left to absorb the full meaning of what had happened. The Galactic Concord, along with countless other civilizations, began rewriting their policies on war, diplomacy, and defense. They learned a hard lesson about underestimating those who chose kindness and peace as a form of strength rather than weakness. Children on dozens of planets grew up hearing stories of the Blue World's people, the Deathworlders who were kind and gentle, yet possessed a power so great it could change the course of history. These tales became part of every culture's heritage, taught not just as history, but as a warning and an inspiration. Parents would tell their children, "Be kind like the humans, but never, ever mistake their kindness for surrender." This line echoed in homes and schools across the galaxy, a reminder that mercy was a choice, not a weakness, and patience was a strength waiting for its moment. The day humanity stopped playing nice was etched into the memory of the stars. Legend told around campfires on distant worlds, in halls of government, and in the quiet moments before battle. It became a cautionary tale, a wake-up call, and above all, a reminder that the Deathworlders, especially those from Earth, were not to be provoked. The galaxy understood that kindness could hide great power, and that patience was not the absence of strength, but the measure of it. From that day forward, every species learned to respect the humans not only for their compassion, but for the fierce, unyielding will that lay beneath it. The Blue World's people had shown that true peace was earned through understanding and strength, and that sometimes the greatest warriors are those who fight to protect, not to destroy. And so, the legacy of humanity became a beacon of hope and a warning all in one. Never underestimate the kind ones from the Deathworld, for when they choose to stop playing nice, the galaxy itself changes forever.